This video is a demonstration of some hue and saturation adjustment techniques in Photoshop. It was made on April 21st, 2012 in support of a discussion on a Luminous Landscapes forum. The image I'm using is from a Canon 5D2 with the 24-105L lens. It's a picture of the famous painted ladies in San Francisco. Unfortunately, I was there on a very cloudy and overcast day, so the colors are there, but they're quite muted because of the low and diffused light. For this demonstration, I have preloaded and pre-built 4 different documents, one for each of the methods that I'll look at. I've also added 3 different color samplers that are outlined by these black boxes, and I've highlighted in the info palette on the right those 3 color sampler points so we can watch them as we go through. I've also added a text layer to each of the documents, just so as we toggle through them we'll know which one we're looking at. This first one down here says Hue Sat. I have also turned on soft proofing for each of the documents with the gamut warning on. The soft proofing I'm using is for my Epson 3880 with premium luster photo paper. That is the widest gamut combination that I have available to me. In addition, I've created a saturation mask that is preloaded in each of the images. I'll go here to the Channels palette and look at that mask. This was created using the HSB HSL filter. Whites in this mask indicate low saturation and darks indicate higher saturation on the starting image. As you can see, this one is mostly white, very light in color, so that this indicating that the colors are all starting at a very low saturation level. I will start with the hue saturation version of the image. You see in the layers palette over here I've already loaded the Hue Sat, normal Photoshop Hue Sat layer, but the saturation is set to 0. The saturation mask is in place. So the first thing I'll do is slam the saturation slider all the way to the right, 100%. Obviously you get garbage, but that's to demonstrate the out of gamut and other things that will happen in Hue Sat. If you push it to the higher limit, it's able to go quite a ways. The gray areas that show on the screen now are the gamut warning showing up. So now I'll back off that saturation layer until the gamut warnings go away. And I've already predetermined by pixel peeping this that that's at a saturation level of about 75. Now obviously even that is a little bit over the top. We'll come back later and lower that even more to maybe a more reasonable level. But just wanted to show the technique that I'm working on here is to drive the colors as far as they'll go with each method to see what the differences are. If I shift click on the saturation mask, we'll see a change in difference, and we'll also see in the bottom of the image gray areas showing up, showing out of gamut colors with the saturation mask off. There's with it back on again. Now I'll shift in the tabs at the top to the channel mixer version. Again, the adjustment layers are off, or not off, but set at 0% opacity, so there's no change. I'm going to take this first channel mixer layer and raise it to 100%. There is a saturation mask in place. If you look at the settings I've used here, I've run the red channel up to 190 and the offset in green and blue of -45, and the same settings then are made in the green and blue channel. Now even with that channel mixer setting and the opacity set to 100%, I'm not reaching out of gamut on any of the colors. So I simply copied that channel and made another copy of it. I'll turn that on, and I've got it set at 50% opacity. That's the limit that I found with the channel mixer to avoid out of gamut. If I run that opacity up just a little bit, you'll see out of gamut showing up in the bottom of the image. 50% is the area I determined is about the right spot to use channel mixer to show the maximum achievable color without exceeding the gamut in the soft proof that I have set up. Next I'll move to the next tab, which is a lab version. This has been placed in lab mode, and a saturation curve for lab has already been set in. And if we look at the A and B channels for that, you'll see the kind of curve that I used, or linear curve. It's fairly steep, and right now it is set at 0% opacity. So I'll run that up to 100, and I get out of gamut areas showing up. So I start backing it down until those go away, and you get a description of that layer. I've already determined that 56% at that curve level is the highest point I can go to without exceeding the gamut. in the soft proof. The final version I'll go to is one with Adobe Camera Raw. To build this version, I made 3 different conversions of the raw file in Adobe Camera Raw. They're over here in the Layers palette. The first one, the bottom one, is Adobe Camera Raw with Sat 100. I'll turn that on, and that's with saturation. What you see now is saturation only, pushed in Adobe Camera Raw to its maximum amount. You'll see when we compare to the others that it's nowhere near reaching the gamut. The limits with Adobe Camera Raw are pretty low. I'll turn on the one above that. This is Adobe Camera Raw with vibrance set at 100, but saturation left at 0. So that's quite a bit different. And the third one is both of them set to the max. And even with that, I'm not reaching gamut, excess gamut on my soft proof. Now, with all those adjustments in place, I'll go back up to my document tabs and cycle through them fairly quickly so we can just toggle and see the differences. There's the Hue Sat version at max. There's the Channel Mixer version at max. There's the Lab version mixer at max. And there's Adobe Camera Raw with the saturation and vibrance both set to 100, which does not exceed the gamut. One more time. Hue Saturation, Channel Mixer, Lab, Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to go back and review. Look in the Hue Sat version, and let's pay attention to the color sampler points in the info palette in the lower hand right. This red box I've drawn with my video recorder. It's not part of Photoshop, just to highlight it for you. And the first thing we'll notice with that Hue Sat layer highlighted, we'll see the before and after, and the hue does not change. It stays at, for those 3 colors, stays at 8 degrees, 227 degrees, 343 degrees. And all the changes happen in saturation and brightness. Now I'll go to the Channel Mixer version, and we see some slight hue changes. Really only 1 degree in one of the sample points. The first sample point, which is this one in the bottom on the very bright red, went 1 degree. The other stayed the same. We go to the Lab version, set to max. We'll notice that hue shifts are a little bit stronger. The hue on the first sample point, 6 degrees to 2 degrees. Second sample point, 223 degrees to 221, a 2 degree difference. And the third sample point, another 2 degree difference. Those don't sound like much, but depending upon the hue and color that you hit, they can be quite a bit. And going to this ACR version, we have to I'll have to alt toggle on the background to see the difference. Sample point 1 goes from 8 degrees to 15 degrees, pretty good hue shift. Sample point 2 from 227 to 226, not much, and sample point 3 remains unchanged. Now let's go back through again and look at some other differences. Let's start with the Hue Sat layer compared to the Channel Mixer. Hue Sat, Channel Mixer. Main thing I notice about Channel Mixer is that the tone's overall a little brighter. It increases brightness to reach its saturation levels more than the Hue Sat does. The shadows in the image are a little bit more pronounced in the Channel Mixer version. In the Lab version, your guess is as good as mine. There's changes all over the place, differences. Some colors are much more pronounced in the Channel Mixer version. Some colors are a little bit more pronounced in the Lab version. But overall, the Channel Mixer and the Hue Sat seem to create a much higher level of saturation than Lab will before out-of-gamut conditions are reached. Now I'll go back through one more time and make some adjustments to what I think are a little bit more reasonable. In the Hue Sat version, I'm going to lower the saturation from 75 to 55. Just my personal taste, that's probably where I would have left that one. In the Channel Mixer version, I'm going to just turn off this extra 50% layer and leave it at 100. That looks pretty good. One Channel Mixer layer before and after. And in the Lab version, probably leave it as is for a fair comparison of what these might look like. And that's my challenge in doing this, is trying to determine what is a fair comparison. I've tried to find one sample point to say drive all of the versions so that that one sample point is the same and look at the differences, but I haven't had much success in doing that. Again, here's Channel Mixer, HughSat, Lab.